welcome to my very first bake along. It is lovely to have you here in my little kitchen. So my name is Alice and I run Alice Through the Year, which is a seasonal cookery school, and it's run here from my little kitchen in the heart of the Cotswolds. So today we are going to be making one of my favourite cakes, which is an Easter classic, the Simnel cake. And a Simnel cake is especially for Easter because we have the 11 disciples who are sat around the top of the cake, and it's a rich fruity cake with a hidden marzipan layer. And today we're going to make everything from scratch, but if you've got some shop bought marzipan, then you can use that too. As today is a bake along, you can bake along with me if you'd like to. I'm going to weigh out all the ingredients as we go. Sorry, I've already weighed them out, but you can weigh them out as we go. If you want to get ahead with that, you can pause the video and all the ingredients are listed below. So I'm going to run through the ingredients now if you'd like to weigh along with me. So we need 220 grams of self-raising flour, 100 grams of Glace Cherries, 200 grams of sultanas or raisins, 100 grams of currants, 50 grams of mixed peel, which I've pre-diced, 220 grams of golden caster sugar, or you could just use normal caster sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 orange, or you could use a lemon. This is optional, this one. A little bit of brandy, sherry or rum, totally up to you whether you put that in. And we've got some really nice soft salted butter. You could use unsalted as well, that's fine, but it's really important that it's soft. If yours isn't soft, if it's straight out of the fridge, then dice it up really small and pop it in the microwave for about 20 seconds. Do put the effort into dicing it up, because if you just popped it in the microwave like this as a whole, it would melt in the inside and it would still be hard on the outside. So give that a cube up and pop it in the microwave. We have got some lovely spices here. I've got mixed spice and also some cinnamon, and that's a teaspoon of each. But if you don't like spices, or you don't want to add those in, then that's totally fine too. And then we need 4 eggs as well. That is everything that we need for the cake batter. Then for the marzipan, we need 200 grams of ground almonds and 200 grams of icing sugar, the juice of half a lemon and 1 egg. And that is it. That's all we need for our delicious Simnel cake. So first of all, we're going to get cracking with the marzipan, but before we start doing that, we're going to preheat our ovens. So the ovens need to be preheated to 150 degrees. If you've got a fan oven, then I might lower that down to about 40, and if you're using an Aga, then you would be baking this in your roasting oven or your baking oven. If you're using the roasting oven, pop 2 shelves in and you'll bake it for less time as well. Okay, so I'm going to pop my ingredients to the side, and then I'm also going to preheat my oven now. Right, so bear with me. I thought it would be best to do a bake along so it's done in real time, so you can do exactly what I'm doing and gives you a bit of time to get everything ready as well. So this is what we need for our marzipan. But I'm going to pop my oven on now, 150 degrees. Just going to start that with preheating. So first of all, the marzipan, we need 1 bowl and a wooden spoon. And this is really, really easy. Of course, you can buy shop bought marzipan, that's fine, but actually homemade is really quite straightforward and simple to do. So in we go with the icing sugar, and you can get a bit of a cloud going on here. Okay. Then we need all of our ground almonds, they go in too. Dip them all in. And then we're just going to give that a quick mix together. So mix together the dry ingredients. Now some people who make marzipan, they tend to put a few drops of almond essence in, and if you like it really almondy, then absolutely you can do that now. And I would probably use about a teaspoon or so of almond essence in there. So that's all mixed together nicely. We're then going to crack in 1 egg, and just into the centre here. Okay, like that. And then we're just going to mix that together with our wooden spoon. So we want this to be not too sticky, just a firm dough. So we might not need to add our lemon juice, it depends on the size of your egg, but we want to get a nice firm dough that's rollable. We don't want it too sticky, but you can find actually that this marzipan that we're making does differ from the shop bought stuff. It is a little bit stickier. So when we roll it out, we might need a little bit of icing sugar just to stop it from sticking to the sides. Right, I'm going to get my hands in now, scrape off the marzipan from the spoon, and get my hands in and just form that into a nice ball. And I can see that it needs just a little bit of lemon just to help bind that all together. So I'm just going to pop a little squeeze in there. Make sure we don't get any pips going in. I've probably added about a tablespoon into there. And that will give it a nice citrusy flavour as well. You can actually add some lemon or orange zest to this if you want to give it even more flavour as well. So we're just mixing this with our hands and getting it into a nice firm ball. Like that. Just keep working it. Working. It will be a bit sticky, but that's absolutely fine. Okay, so that is that. Our lovely marzipan is all ready to go. We're now going to split that into 3 balls, and that's because we want to have one layer running through the middle, a layer on top, and then finally some marzipan left over for those disciples. So it's feeling a little bit sticky, but that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to separate that into 3 pieces. We'll do that later. So I'm going to pop that to one side and then just give my hands a quick wash. Okay, right. So that was so easy. Making homemade marzipan is really the simplest thing, and that's exactly what you would do if you were doing any other type of marzipan for any other recipe, maybe a stollen. It's as simple as that. But of course, there's no problem in using some shop-bought marzipan as well. If you were using shop-bought, you would use 400 grams. So we're now going to move on and make our delicious fruity batter. So for this, we will need a bowl, mixing bowl, a nice big mixing bowl. We will also need a mixer. So I'm going to use a handheld mixer today, but if you haven't got a handheld mixer, you can just use a good old wooden spoon, or you can of course use a freestanding mixer, and the timings would be exactly the same for that as well. So I'm going to be using the all-in-one method to make the simple batter, and this is my favourite thing to do because it's really easy and it also gives, I find that it gives the best results. So in we go with just the basic ingredients for a sponge, which is butter, sugar, flour and egg. So that's all we're going to do for the all-in-one mix to begin with, and that's what you would do if you were making something like a Victoria sponge or a lemon drizzle. So in we go with our nice softened butter there. Then in goes the flour. If you are gluten-free, you can absolutely use gluten-free flour and that will work a treat. Then in goes the sugar. Bit of help there with the sugar. Lovely. And in we go with our 4 eggs. So I haven't mentioned, but we are going to be using a an 8-inch cake tin, and it needs to be quite a deep cake tin. So the sandwich tins wouldn't really work for this. It needs to be nice and deep. And I'm going to be using a spring bottom cake tin. But if you've just got one that's all fixed together, that's absolutely fine. You can use that too. So in we go with our 4 eggs. I'll give my hands a quick wipe. Okay, and that is it. All these other ingredients we're going to come to, but first of all, we're going to do this mixing together of this lovely batter. So I'm going to get my handheld mixer. And these are great. I always use this when I'm making my sponges, just because they're a lot easier to clean than my handheld, my standalone mixer. Now whenever I'm making a sponge, I know this seems a bit of a faff to do, or you think it's a bit over the top, but I know that if I beat my mixture for 1 minute, it's going to be exactly what I want it to be. It's going to be nicely incorporated, it's not going to be overmixed, it's not going to be undermixed. So I always use a timer when I'm baking. 1 minute goes on, and I've got my nice Easter themed timer there as well, the little bunny, and on we go. And we're just going to mix this together till it's nicely combined. And it's really important that you've got that softened butter. If we use butter straight from the fridge, it wouldn't mix in together, so it's really, really important we use soft butter for this. Get it all nicely mixed in. And of course, if you don't have a mixer, you can use a wooden spoon. I probably mix it by hand for 2 minutes. Make sure that it's all nicely incorporated in. Getting up on the side, make sure that everything's coming down into the bowl. And we're almost there with this. 5 seconds to go. Perfect. Okay, lovely. Pop those to one side. Okay, so we've got a lovely soft batter here. There are no lumps of butter. Everything is nicely combined. It's really soft and silky. Now we're putting a lot of fruit into this because obviously it's a fruit cake, but we should still have a nice light fluffy sponge that's surrounding the fruit. So in we go with the fruit. We've got our 100 grams of currants and they go in. If you haven't got the same fruit here as I'm using today, 200 grams of raisins and sultanas, you can just use any dried fruit that you like. Apricots, you could use some dried apples, cranberries, anything really would be nice in this. You've got to have a lot of the fruit, so make sure it's exactly the same quantities. So 300 grams of dried fruit in total. Then I've got my cherries, which I've cut into quarters, and they go in too. And then our mixed spice and our cinnamon. So that's a teaspoon of each. And then we want to add our salt. Now when I'm baking, I always use measuring spoons, and I suggest that if you want to perfect your baking that you buy a pair of measuring spoons, because they give you exactly the right measurement. A teaspoon is very different to a teaspoon that you could on your measuring spoons. You'll get a lot less in an actual teaspoon than you will in a measured teaspoon here. So we're going to use half a teaspoon of salt, and you'll be surprised with how much it is. So that goes in there. And then I want to add 1 tablespoon of rum. I'm using rum today. Sherry or brandy would be fine. If you don't want to add this, you could just add a tablespoon of orange juice that is. So 1 tablespoon goes in, and then the zest of our orange, and I'm going to use my microplane grater here, but you could use a box grater, and we want all of the orange to go in this, so it's really fruity and citrusy and delicious. So a Simnel cake was actually created quite a while ago in the Victorian times, and it was originally created for maids or servants who were working in stately homes and wanted to go home and visit their mums for Mother's Day. And they would bring this home to their mums for a Mother's Day treat. And Mother's Day often falls round about the same time as Easter, and they just think that it's sort of been carried over onto Easter as an Easter treat. And it certainly is one of my favourite Easter recipes to make, as well of course as hot cross buns. Right, perfect. So all that orange has gone in there. Lovely. And I'm going to pop this to the side. As you can imagine, it's chaos on the other side of the camera. Good job you can't see it. We're going to keep a nice, clean and tidy station there. So, all of our ingredients have gone in, and we're going to give it a nice mix together. Making sure that all that fruit is nice and evenly distributed. And that spice as well that's running through. I sometimes put a bit of nutmeg in, that also works really well, or a pinch of ground cloves. whatever you like. It's totally up to you. Smells fantastic, and it's such a lovely, light, fluffy batter. Sorry. Okay. People do worry about over mixing, but on this, don't worry about it. We're just giving it a final stir to make sure that everything's been incorporated nicely. But that is fantastic. It's good to go. So we're going to set this to one side now, and then we're going to line our tin. Now, some people don't bother lining their tins, but I always think it's worth effort doing the lining of the tin, because otherwise, if you've gone to a huge amount of effort to make this delicious cake and the cake sticks in the tin, you feel pretty rubbish about it and you'll be kicking yourself. So we're going to line our tin. So I'm using a 8-inch tin, and it's really important if you're making this recipe to use the correct tin size. Any smaller, then it will be sort of a peak over the top. So if it was sort of a 7-inch, that would be too small, and a 9-inch, obviously it's going to be a bit flatter. Okay, so it's important to get the right cake size, tin size for your cake. Okay, and we are going to use some greaseproof paper to line our tin. Now, if you have got one of those wonderful little things that are already lined for you, then that's great. I'm very jealous, but for those who don't, we're going to line it with our greaseproof paper. So roll out your greaseproof, on it goes, and with a pencil, we just mark round the bottom. As I said, I know this is a bit time consuming, but I promise you it's really worth doing if you want to get your cake out. Right, and then I'm going to see if I can pop something down so you can see that here. I'm going to run a pencil mark and roll my tin along like that. And that's measured about halfway. And I'm going to put it back again and roll again. So that's half of the tin. Sorry, when I'm saying halfway, that's measured half the tin. So we're going to pop that to one side now. And that's just to cover this, the outer bit of the tin. So I'm then going to cut off my greaseproof, put that to one side, and where I've created that line, I'm then just going to fold it over in half so that I know that I've got 2 strips which are the right length to cover round the sides here. And as I said, yeah, it is a bit of a faff doing this, but it's really worth putting the effort in to make sure that your cake comes out. I've certainly done it in the past, and I've been very cross with myself for not bothering to line it. Right. Okay. So, one side. And then cut out our circle. With our circle, I tend to fold it in half, fold the circle in half, and then fold it again into a quarter, just so it doesn't sort of start curling up on myself again. So you can see there, that's a quarter of the circle, and I'm just going to cut around that. Pop that to one side. And that is it, our beautifully grease-proof lined tin. So the final thing I'm going to do to make sure it really doesn't stick is quickly line this with a bit of oil around the sides. So I've got just a bit of sunflower oil here, and that's my pinger going off. I'm not making something in the microwave, that's just for my preheated oven. I've got a combination oven. So I'm going to use some just plain sunflower vegetable oil and just brush all the way around my tin. And doing this just makes sure that we've got something for the lovely lined greaseproof to stick to. If you haven't got greaseproof, you can of course use baking parchment. And I'm going to grease the bottom as well, like this. That to one side. And then in we go with our beautifully lined liner. Always make sure that the side that you've drawn on, you flip and put it underneath, because otherwise you'll get the lead in the cake, which I don't think it would kill you, but it's best probably not to do that. And then in we go with our liners from the side. Now I don't let it go like this, I put it round the other way so that it looks the way it wants to curl round, if that makes sense. Pop it in there, it sticks nicely with my lovely oiled side. And then on with the other side, again, not doing it like that, the way that it naturally wants to curl, but pushing it so it curls the other way. And if that doesn't make any sense, then don't worry, it doesn't really matter as long as it's all nice and sticking down on the sides. So there we are, a perfectly lined tin. And it wasn't too much trouble to do it, was it? So now we are going to roll out our marzipan and separate it into its 3 balls. So I've got a plate here that I'm going to put that onto. Got a little bit of icing sugar, extra icing sugar here. And I'm just going to pop a little bit of icing sugar because it is quite sticky, and I imagine that yours is quite sticky too. Just going to pop that on the surface and rub in a little bit of the icing sugar. And then we don't need to measure this out, you can just do it by eye, and you want to roll it into a sausage and then using a sharp knife cut it into 3 equal bits there. Okay, and we need to use one of them now, so I'm going to pop those 2 there on my plate, and we're just going to be using that little section there. So just in case I need a bit more icing sugar as we roll out. So this bit that we're using here, this section here, is going to be for our middle layer that runs through the cake. And a tip for getting it nice, so making sure it doesn't stick, is to make sure that you've got lots of icing sugar underneath. And you do one roll, you do a couple of rolls, 1, 2 roll, and then you turn it. You've got to keep rolling and turning. My other tip that I've got to make sure that you've got the right thickness and amount of marzipan in your layer is to get a piece of string, just going to pull that back here, and just measure the circumference there. And that way you know that that is how much, I'm going to cut that off, that is how much you need to roll your marzipan out. So we need that much. I'm just going to show you, just use a bit of string. And you're going to be measuring out that circumference. I hope that makes sense. So, on to our rolling out. Get a bit more icing sugar. I wouldn't use flour for this because obviously it will then give it a floury flavour. We don't want that. So I'm going to do 1, 2 rolls, then turn it. Just a quarter clockwise turn or anti-clockwise, whatever you like. 1, 2 and turn. 1, 2 and turn. Now all the weight is from the rolling pin. I'm not putting any weight on it. I'm just guiding it with my hands. Now if we were just to go gung-ho and roll out, it would stick and it would be a sticky mess and a nightmare to pick off. So it's really important just to be a bit gentle with this. Just 1, 2 roll and then turn. 1, 2 and then turn. 1, 2 and then turn. And every time you think it's getting a little bit sticky, just use a bit of icing sugar. 1, 2 and then turn. 1, 2 and turn. Try and keep it, if you can, in the sort of circular shape, but it doesn't matter too much if you can't. And this is the same technique that I would use if I was rolling out pastry. Oh, I'm getting a bit sticky here. And if you've got a tear like I've got there, that's absolutely fine. Just a bit more icing sugar and just patch it up with your fingers. No one is going to see this layer, so it doesn't matter. And it's good practice for when you go and do your final layer on the top. Okay. I'm going to shape it into a circle. It's very malleable, so you can reshape it if it's not quite the shape you want, if it's coming out a bit oval or rectangular. Okay. I'm going to get my string, which I've put somewhere here, and just check. I'm a bit far off on this. I still need to go roll it out a little bit more. And that's why that string is just so handy, because I might have thought, oh yeah, that's enough, but actually it's not quite. So we're just going to keep rolling until we've got our correct shape. And you can imagine if you put a bit of orange zest in there, it'd be delicious into the marzipan. Okay. Fantastic. Right. Just give it another measure. Perfect, we're about there now. So I'm just going to slide that gently to one side. And just going to quickly give my hands a quick wash because I'm covered in icing sugar. Then we're going to fill our lovely cake tin with our batter. So we've got our cake tin, which is already lined. I'm going to just wipe this down. And then we're going to half fill it because obviously we want to then add our lovely marzipan layer. So we're going to half fill the cake tin. Okay. So in we go. A lovely soft mixture. Now I'm just sort of eyeballing how much I need to go in. You don't need to be absolutely precise. And then I'm just going to take a metal spoon and push that down, making sure I've got it going right into all of the corners there. Not the corners, sorry. So all right to the very edge. Just gently pushing it, not pushing it too hard. Gently pushing that round into the sides. Lovely. It smells amazing, especially that rum actually. It's giving it a really nice fragrant kick. So we're then going to have to transfer our marzipan into our tin. And to do this, I'm going to just pop a little bit more icing sugar on my rolling pin. And I'm going to roll the marzipan onto my rolling pin. And then gently roll it into my tin. Now, it has sort of collapsed a little bit and folded on itself. That's fine, we can sort it out. Just going to gently lift it up and push it into shape there. As I said, no one is going to see this layer, so it doesn't matter what it looks like. Fantastic. So I'm going to show you now. There we go. So it's lined the whole of the base there. We haven't got any edges sticking out. It's right to the edge there, the marzipan. So now for our final layer, pop our lovely cake batter on. Spoon that in. Such a light and soft batter. It's going to be delicious. I'm sure yours will be delicious too. And again, if you've got making this for anyone with allergies, dairy or gluten allergen, you can absolutely just substitute it, the flour or the butter, for a dairy-free or gluten-free option. Pop these to one side. And then finally, spread our lovely batter. Continue to put it right to the edge, pushing with the back of the spoon. I'm sort of doing that kind of rocking action, pushing it right to the bottom, to the side, sorry. Now, some people think that you should leave a little dip in the bottom, but in the middle, but I don't tend to do that. I just make sure it's nice and flat on top. Okay, like that. Perfect. Now you can use a palette knife as well, but I find a metal spoon does the job nicely. So, hands another wipe. There we have it. Our perfect Simnel cake, and that is ready for the oven. So we're now going to put this in the oven, which we've preheated to 150, and that's going to go in the oven for 2.5 hours. So it's quite a low temperature. It's something that you'd sort of bake your Christmas cake at, but it needs to go in for 2.5 hours, and that is exactly the right amount of time you need to make sure that it's perfectly cooked, and it will be lovely and moist because we're cooking it at a lower temperature. It's not going to be overcooked. I know that 2.5 hours does seem like quite a long time, but that's just right. So it's going to go to the oven for 2.5 hours, and then I will be back with the next part. So our cake has been resting out of the oven for about half an hour. I've just left it to cool. So if you've just taken it out of the oven, then do leave it to cool for about half an hour. And then we are going to take it out of its tin. So it's just nice and warm now. So if you're using a spring tin like this and you just pull it back, if you are using a different type of tin where you push it, you haven't got to push and you just got to literally flip it over, then make sure your hand is underneath, on top, sorry, and then you gently lift it out. And it should, because we've greased it so well, just fall out nicely onto your hand. So I'm going to release this, and it smells so good. The house has been smelling amazing as this has been cooking. And you can see that it was really worth doing that greasing, because this is just going to come off perfectly. And look at that. It's absolutely just the right golden colour. It's not too dark on top. And this is going to be perfectly silky smooth and delicious. So pop those to one side. So we've got our cake here, and we're just going to leave it to cool while we get on a bit more, while we get on with our apricot glaze. So our apricot glaze, which I forgot to mention earlier, sorry about that, we need 2 tablespoons of apricot jam, or you could use honey, and then we need 1 tablespoon of water as well to go on the top. But instead of using water, I'm actually going to use a bit more of my rum, just to give it an extra bit of flavour. So I've got my 2 tablespoons of apricot jam in here in a little pot, so pop that into any saucepan that you've got. And then we need our water or brandy or orange juice or whatever you're going to use. And I'm just going to add 1 tablespoon in here. So that goes in. Move that to one side. And then we're going to pop this on a medium to low heat just to bubble away and reduce down a bit. So pop that on my Arga. So if I was using a normal hob, I would have it on about 4 to 5, maybe not too hot. I'm just going to pop it on my simmering plate here while I get on with rolling out our marzipan. So our cake is just leaving it to cool for a little bit longer, and we can crack on with rolling out the marzipan. So we've got our 2 balls of leftover marzipan that we've been saving here. So I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to use that to roll out on the top. Now I've kept my little bit of string, and that's going to be our measurement to roll out for our top layer here. So the layer that we're going to roll out now is to cover the top here. And this final ball, that's going to be made into the disciples. So we're going to sprinkle out a little of our icing sugar, just to stop it from sticking. And again, we're using exactly the same technique as we did before. Very little pressure onto the rolling pin. It's all coming from the weight of the rolling pin, not your hands. So we're starting with the shape that we want to go in, which is a ball, circular shape. A little bit more icing sugar, and 1, 2, turn, 1, 2, turn, 1, 2, turn, 1, 2, turn. Now don't worry if you're thinking, oh, there's a lot of icing sugar on top, is that going to show? It doesn't matter, you can brush it off with a pastry brush. Or I'm actually going to pop this under my grill, and I'm just going to leave it to crackle and get a few sort of speckledy spots on top. And that's traditionally how you would finish off your Simnel cake, is by blowtorching it or popping it under a grill. But you absolutely do not need to do that. If you don't feel comfortable with doing it under the grill, you don't have to. So gentle rolling and turning. And actually, as we've left this on the side, it probably has firmed up a little bit, and it's a little bit less sticky than it was when we rolled out that centre layer. Okay. Keep rolling. Now this does matter what this top bit looks like, obviously, because it's going to be seen on the top, but we're going to roll it out just a little bigger than that piece of string that we made, and we can trim it off. So it doesn't matter if it's not quite tidy around the edges, because we'll sort that out with a knife. Okay, so I think I'm almost there, and I can hear my apricot jam is bubbling away. And we're using an apricot jam glaze to stick our marzipan top to our cake. If we didn't use that, the marzipan would just slide off the cake. So we want to make sure it's firmly stuck on. Just acts as a glue, an edible glue, obviously. So I think we're almost there. Let's get our piece of string. Where have I put that? So string goes round. Needs a little bit more actually, because I want to have an overlap so I can trim a bit off if necessary. So a couple more rolls. Now, if you like an extra thick layer of marzipan on top, that's fine. You can just use more marzipan. But because it's got marzipan in the middle and also you're going to have the disciples on the top, I think you want quite a nice thin layer so it's not too much to eat. That lovely smell of almond marzipan has been coming through the kitchen. It's been delicious. I've been dying to have a slice of this. So just check. Now that is just over, so I know that that's going to be enough. So I can run that all the way round and I know that that's going to fit nicely with a little bit of overlay for me to trim off. So pop these bits to one side and let's get our cake. I'm just going to pop it onto my hand and remove the base and a layer of grease. Pop that to one side. And then I'm going to get the plate that I'm going to use to serve my lovely Simnel cake on and pop my cake on top. Now I'm going to brush it liberally with some apricot jam that's bubbling away, and I'm going to use a pastry brush to do this. If you haven't got a pastry brush, you can see it's just bubbling, bubbling, bubbling. If you haven't got a pastry brush, then you can just use a little teaspoon and spoon it over the top. That would be fine too. Okay. So, pastry brush, and generously spread that all over the top of your cake. You don't need to put it on the sides, obviously, because the marzipan is just a little hat that goes on the top. So spread that all over. Now you do want to keep some left over because we are going to use a little bit of the apricot glaze to stick our disciples on to the top of the cake. Fantastic. Spread it right to the edge. Make sure that it's nice and sticky. And I'd say that that is just about right. So we're going to use that same technique as we did to lift the marzipan off and into the tin. We're going to use that by using our rolling pin to helping us move it. I'm just going to pop a little bit more icing sugar on just to make sure that we don't get any extra sticking on the top. And again, don't worry about this, it will brush off. So I'm using the rolling pin to lift onto my lovely cake. And there we go. Roll it on. Okay, and you can see that we've got a nice overlap. Now, some people will finish off their Simnel cake by doing a little crimp around the edge. But I just like to leave mine completely plain. But if you want to do a crimp, you would just take 2 pinches and pinch all the way around the side like that. I'm going to run my knife, just trim round the sides to get rid of that overlay, and I'm just very gently paring it back with my knife. Just using quite a sharp knife, but actually a blunt knife also will do the job. Okay, I'm going to come round from the other side, cut that away. This looks lovely. Great. Okay, get rid of those side bits, and you could just leave that and eat it, or coat it in chocolate and make it into a little marzipan truffle. That would be delicious too. Right, so we've got our nice finished top here, a lovely no ridges around the edge. It's looking perfect. You can just finish it off with your fingers just by patting it down if there are any sort of crinkles or tears. But that is good to go. Now we are going to finish off by making our disciples. So traditionally on a Simnel cake you only have 11 disciples because obviously Judas betrayed Jesus, so he isn't welcome on the top of this cake. But what I like to do is I like to make the 12 because it's easier to divide up our sausage that we're going to roll out now and make it into 12 balls rather than making it into 11, which is a bit more complicated with the division. So I'm rolling it out using my hands. I'm kind of spreading out my fingers as I go, making it into a long sausage. Now, if you were to be on Bake Off, I'm sure that you would probably measure all these balls out, but we're not going to do that today. I'm just going to cut it out by eye into half like that. half the sausages, and then we're going to cut it in half again. And then each piece we are going to divide into 3. So we've got 4 little sausages, and these sausages are then going to be divided into 3, so that we've then got 12 pieces. And if some pieces are bigger than others, you can then sort of reduce the size down when you're rolling them. So I'm just taking each piece with my hand, and I'm rolling it in between the palms of my hands. Make sure that it's nice and round like that. So we want to do that with all of them. So I'm putting quite a lot of pressure, I'm squeezing it onto the ball and then releasing it off. Now I know you all know how to roll out, and you can do it however way you want, but I find that actually putting that pressure on and then releasing it off just gives a really nice even ball. So some of these might be a bit bigger or a bit smaller, you just trim them down to size. As you roll them, you might think that one needs a bit cutting off or whatever, that disciple has overeaten at the Last Supper, and if that's the case, then you just remove a little bit off. So keep rolling these out. Now you don't have to decorate the top of your marzipan cake with the disciples. If you wanted to, you could just roll out the marzipan and cut it some flower shapes out using a stencil cutter or cookie cutter, or you could just decorate with some plain flowers from your garden. That would be lovely too. It's totally up to you how you decorate your cake. And then all we're going to do is make a little dent around the outside of the cake and pop them little disciples in the nests that you've made using your finger. So we've got a little bit more rolling to do, almost there with these. Try and make sure they're as round as you can get them, but it doesn't matter, it's a homemade cake. It will still look lovely if they're a bit misshapen. So we have our 12 disciples here, and because we only need 11, we're going to eat this one at a later date. You can cover it in chocolate, as I said, and make it into a truffle. That would be delicious, but I'm going to pop that to one side. And if you are worried about having an icing on the top of your cake and you want it nice and smooth and you're not going to pop it under your grill or under the blowtorch, then just use a pastry brush and brush away any excess icing sugar that you might have. Brush it off my plate as well. Okay, so now, to make sure that these disciples sit nicely on top of the cake, we're going to use our thumb and press in little nest into all around the outside of the cake, about 1 centimetre away from the lip. Now, because we're using 11 disciples, it's a bit more difficult to work out the spacing. If it was 12 on the clock, then it would be easy, 5, 10, 15, 20. But because it's 11, it's going to be a bit more difficult, but we'll see how it goes. So just putting a lot of pressure at the top of your thumb and making a little dent like that, and sort of space, sort of an even space around the cake. It's quite difficult, as I said, to kind of get this right because you're kind of guessing how much will fit on with the 11 disciples, but it doesn't matter. How many have we done there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. Perfect. I'm going to press my thumb into those a little bit more, and then I'm going to use that apricot glaze that we've got left over just to seal the bottoms and help them to stick on so they don't roll off. So just use a little bit of that apricot glaze. If it's gotten too sticky, then just pop it back on to the heat and let it bubble away. I'm just going to press those in, just gently. You don't need too much pressure so that you misshape them. I'm just going to pop those on top. And this is a really nice activity to do with children in the holidays, just before Easter. And this cake will keep for about 2 weeks in a sealed tin. That's the good thing about fruit cakes. They keep for an awful lot longer if no one has eaten them before that time, that is. So keep popping these all the way round. And as I say, I'm going to pop this, cover it in icing sugar and pop it under the grill, just so it gets a nice sort of speckled top. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that or popping it under the blowtorch, then you really don't need to. It will look just as lovely without being finished off under the grill. So we've got 3 more to go. Popping them in their little dents that you've made into those little nests. Okay. Our last one's going on here. Fantastic. And that is it. That is our Simnel cake done. And I think it looks pretty good. So for me, oh actually hang on a second, we've got one missing. Let me just space those out. I thought I had a space missing, but there we go. Pop him on there. Shuffle those around a bit. Perfect. So that is our lovely finished Simnel cake and it's ready to eat, but I'm going to finish it off with just a dusting of icing sugar and under the grill. But as I said, it will look lovely just as it is. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope that you enjoy your delicious Simnel cake and those who will be sharing it with this Easter. Do please follow me on Instagram or other forms of social media, Facebook too, at Alice Through the Year, or check out any of my workshops that I'm hosting over spring and summer at www.alicethroughtheyear.com. Thank you for joining me and hope to see you soon.